still remember the way my heart stopped for a second when I saw the envelope. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope resting neatly in our mailbox, almost as if someone had just placed it there. I stared at it, not quite understanding what I was seeing. The handwriting on the front was familiar, elegant, strong, unmistakably hers. It was from Diana. Diana, my mother-in-law. Diana, whose funeral we had just attended the day before. For a few moments I just stood there, holding the letter with trembling fingers, feeling a strange mix of fear, confusion, and disbelief. How could this be? How could someone who had passed away send me a letter? My mind was racing. I thought I must have misunderstood something. Maybe it was a different Diana. Maybe it was some kind of paperwork from the church. But no, the handwriting was hers. And it was addressed directly to me, Catherine Zeta-Jones. Let me take you back for a moment. I'm 35 years old, a web designer who works remotely. About 5 years ago, I married Fred, a kind-hearted man 4 years older than me. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and from our first date, it just clicked. We've been close ever since. Our marriage hasn't been perfect, no relationship is, but we love each other deeply. The one thing we haven't been able to have is children. We both wanted them right from the beginning, but despite our efforts and hope, it just hasn't happened. There were months when I was obsessed with tests, appointments, charts, and trying everything under the sun. And there were moments I broke down in tears, wondering if something was wrong with me. But through all that, there was one person who never judged me, who never made me feel less than, who always knew the right thing to say. Diana. She was more than just my mother-in-law. She was a friend, a mentor, someone I could grab waffles with on a lazy afternoon or call at midnight just to talk. She had this glow about her, like she saw the world a little more kindly than the rest of us. She used to say things like, "Catherine, life doesn't run on a schedule. It runs on grace." And somehow, even when I felt like a complete mess, she made me believe that maybe everything was still going to be okay. But then she was gone. It happened so fast. One minute we were making plans to go out for lunch. The next, Fred and I found her collapsed in her room at the in-laws' house. I'll never forget that moment. The house was unusually quiet. Diana always waited outside when we came to pick her up. But that day, she wasn't there. And when she didn't answer her phone, we used our spare key and went inside. The sight of her on the floor, unmoving, it shattered something inside me. Fred screamed for help and called the ambulance. I dropped to my knees beside her, trying not to panic, but I knew deep down that something was very wrong. They said it was a stroke, sudden and fatal. Just like that, Diana was gone. The days that followed were a blur of grief, phone calls, arrangements, and trying to function when all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and cry. The funeral was small, just family and close friends. Diana's older son, Jimmy, acted as the family representative. I tried to stay composed for Fred's sake, but inside, I was a wreck. Jimmy and his wife, Brittany, showed up at the funeral looking like they were going to a casual lunch. Brittany was laughing one minute, checking her phone the next. Jimmy just looked bored. There wasn't even a trace of sadness in his eyes. Fred noticed it too, but he didn't say much. We both knew something was off, and honestly, it wasn't surprising. Jimmy and Brittany never liked me. They made that clear in small, snide remarks whenever they could. Brittany would smirk and say things like, "Still no baby bump, Catherine?" Or, "Being childless at your age? Kind of selfish." And Jimmy wasn't any better. He'd joke that Fred and I were the dead branch of the family tree. We never told Diana about any of it. We didn't want to upset her. She thought Jimmy's family was perfect. She believed they loved and respected her. We just let her have that peace. Now you understand why that letter shook me to my core. Back to that morning. I took the envelope inside, my hands still shaking. I sat down at the kitchen table, placed the letter in front of me, and just stared at it for a moment. Then I opened it. Her handwriting filled the page, strong and steady. I could almost hear her voice as I read. "Dear Catherine, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. I've asked the pastor to deliver this to you after my funeral. There's something important I need you to do." My eyes widened. She went on to explain that in her closet, at the in-laws' house, there was a hidden door. Behind it was something she had prepared in case things went wrong. She included instructions on how to open the hidden door and told me to go alone. My heart was pounding. She even mentioned a lawyer, Mr. Smith, whom she had trusted for years. His contact information was at the bottom of the letter. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Why had Diana kept this secret? And what could possibly be behind that hidden door? I checked the time. It was just after 9 a.m. Fred had already left to handle some paperwork. I knew that Jimmy and Brittany, along with their kids, would be out too. School and work schedules were predictable. And Brittany had even posted on social media that morning about taking a relaxing day off with Jimmy. Typical. This might be the only chance I had to follow Diana's instructions without being seen. So I got dressed, grabbed my spare key, and headed to the in-laws' house. As I stepped through the door, a wave of emotion hit me. Diana was always the one to greet me here, her warm smile, her cheerful voice, and now, silence. I walked to her room, my steps slow and heavy. I opened the closet just as she said and searched for the panel she mentioned. My fingers fumbled at first, but then I found it. It clicked. The hidden door opened. And what I saw inside, well, let's just say my heart nearly stopped again. There was a box, a locked metal box. Beside it, a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside the envelope were more documents and another letter from Diana. I sat on the edge of her bed and read. She explained everything. Why she had kept this secret, why she chose me, why she didn't trust Jimmy or Brittany. She told me how she suspected they were not what they pretended to be, and how she had quietly prepared a will, a real one, through her lawyer. A notarial will, one that would override any handwritten or forged documents. She had left everything, her estate, her savings, her cherished belongings, to be divided fairly between Fred and Jimmy, but only if her notarial will was found and presented. And she trusted me to do that. She had also changed the beneficiary on her life insurance policy. To me, not because she favored me over Fred, but because she feared Jimmy and Brittany would manipulate Fred, or worse, harm him if they found out. And she was right. I felt tears stream down my cheeks as I folded the letter. Diana had seen more than we gave her credit for. She had known, and she had trusted me with her final wishes. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to honor Diana, no matter what. When I returned home that afternoon, I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world in my bag. Inside were the documents Diana had left for me, the notarial will, the insurance policy, and her final handwritten letter. I must have read it 5 times already, yet every time I unfolded the pages, her voice echoed in my mind like she was still right there, sitting beside me, telling me everything would be okay. But the truth was, it wasn't okay, not yet. Fred came home just after 5 p.m., looking tired and emotionally drained. I wanted to tell him everything immediately, but I knew I had to be careful. So I brewed us some tea, sat beside him on the couch, and quietly handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his hands trembling just slightly. When he finished, he looked up at me, eyes glistening. "She really planned all this?" he asked softly. "She did," I nodded, "and she trusted us to make sure her true wishes are followed." Fred exhaled, long and slow. "That's just like her, huh? Quietly strong, always thinking 2 steps ahead." He looked down at the envelope holding the will, then back at me. "So, what do we do now?" Before I could answer, Fred's phone buzzed. It was a message from Brittany. "Hey, Fred, can you and Catherine come to Mom's place this weekend? We have something important to discuss. Whole family thing." My stomach turned. There was no way this was a coincidence. I showed Fred the documents I had retrieved from the hidden closet. He took a moment to absorb it all. The legal stamps, the lawyer's contact, Diana's confident signature. Then he looked at Brittany's message again and let out a sarcastic laugh. "Let me guess. They're going to try to show us some fake will they magically found?" "I wouldn't be surprised," I said. We agreed to go. Better to face them head on. But I had an idea. "I think Mr. Smith should come with us," I said. Fred raised an eyebrow. "Diana's lawyer?" he asked. "Yes. We need someone's official there in case Jimmy tries to pull anything shady, and it'll be better to have him confirm the real will before they do something stupid." Fred agreed. The next day, I called Mr. Smith. He remembered Diana fondly, and without hesitation, agreed to help. We arranged for him to meet us outside the in-laws' house at the designated time. The weekend came too quickly. Fred and I drove in silence, the tension sitting heavy between us. When we pulled into the driveway, Mr. Smith was already there, standing near his car with a briefcase. We greeted him, then walked up the steps together. Jimmy and Brittany opened the door with matching smug expressions. "There you are," Brittany said, all sugary fake smiles. "Come in, we've been waiting." Their kids weren't around. I assumed they'd been left with a babysitter, which only heightened my suspicion that something major was about to go down. As soon as we sat down in the living room, Jimmy pulled out a folder and slammed it on the coffee table. "This," he announced with theatrical flair, "is Diana's will." Brittany grinned, her arms folded, like she was holding back a victorious laugh. "It says everything belongs to us. The house, the savings, the valuables. Sorry, guys, looks like you're out." Fred blinked, stunned. I remained calm, letting them enjoy their little moment. Then I stood up and walked toward the front door. Jimmy squinted. "Where are you going?" "I'll be right back," I said, and returned moments later with Mr. Smith. As soon as he stepped inside, Brittany's smile disappeared. Jimmy's face twisted with confusion. "Who the hell is this?" he snapped. "This is Mr. Smith," I said evenly. "Diana's lawyer, the one she trusted to handle her affairs." Brittany looked like she was going to choke. Jimmy's eyes darted between Mr. Smith and the so-called will he had just proudly presented. Mr. Smith didn't waste any time. "May I take a look at the document?" Jimmy hesitated, then handed it over like a petulant child being told to give back a stolen toy. Mr. Smith adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages. Then he placed the papers down and folded his hands. "This document," he began, "is not valid as a last will and testament." Jimmy shot up from his seat. "What? What are you talking about?" Mr. Smith remained composed. "A holographic will must be entirely handwritten and signed by the person creating it. In this case, only the words last will and Diana's signature are handwritten. The rest is printed." He looked Jimmy straight in the eye. "Which means this is not legally binding. In fact, it may be considered forgery if there's evidence it wasn't authored by Diana herself." For a moment, the room was frozen. Brittany's mouth flapped like a fish out of water. Jimmy snatched the paper and examined it, his eyes wild. "So what? What if it is printed? Mom wanted us to have everything." "Actually," I said, pulling out the real document, "Diana prepared a notarial will, and she entrusted it to me." I handed the will to Mr. Smith, who confirmed its validity with a nod. "In this document," he explained, "Diana clearly states her estate is to be equally divided between Fred and Jimmy." Jimmy looked like someone had slapped him across the face. "What the? She wouldn't do that. That's not fair. I have a family to support. Fred doesn't even have kids." I stayed calm, though my heart was racing. "There's more," I added. "The beneficiary of her life insurance policy is me." Brittany exploded. "What? That's insane! Why would she give it to you and not her own son?" "Because she trusted me to carry out her wishes," I replied firmly. Jimmy banged his fist on the table. "This is bull. This whole thing is a setup. We deserve that money. We were the ones taking care of her." Fred couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Taking care of her? You treated her like a nuisance. You mocked us behind her back and only acted nice when she was around. Don't pretend you were devoted." Mr. Smith interjected before things got uglier. "There's no need to argue. The legal documents speak for themselves." But Brittany had reached her boiling point. "I won't accept this!" she screamed. "You think just because you don't have kids, you get to steal everything from us? We gave Diana grandchildren. We're the ones who matter. You two are nothing!" And then she lunged at me. Before anyone could stop her, she struck me across the head with her ring-covered hand. I gasped in pain as the blow landed, sharp, metallic, unexpected. Fred and Mr. Smith quickly pulled her away, but Brittany wasn't done. She was shouting incoherently, clawing at the air. "Give me the inheritance. I earned it. I deserve it." Her eyes were wild. Jimmy joined in, shouting about how the money was theirs, about how we were just useless losers who didn't know what real family meant. That was when Fred called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived. Mr. Smith calmly explained the situation while I held a cold cloth to my head. Brittany was still raging, Jimmy pacing like a caged animal. Eventually, they were both escorted out in handcuffs. The house grew quiet again. Just me, Fred, and Mr. Smith, standing there in the ruins of a family that had finally cracked apart. Fred looked at me with a mix of sadness and relief. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I nodded. "That was a lot." He exhaled. "Let's get out of here." As we stepped outside, I looked back at the house where Diana had spent her last years. It didn't feel like a home anymore, not without her. But somewhere deep in my chest, there was also peace. Diana's voice echoed in my mind. "Catherine, life doesn't run on a schedule. It runs on grace." And I knew somehow she had guided us through this storm. In the days following the chaos at the in-laws' house, Fred and I barely spoke to anyone. Our phones buzzed with messages from distant relatives, some expressing support, others fishing for gossip. We ignored most of them. We needed time to process what had just happened. I had a dull ache on the side of my head from where Brittany hit me, but the physical pain didn't compare to the emotional weight I carried. Diana's absence still left a deep void, and now, on top of mourning her, we had this ugly mess with Jimmy and Brittany unraveling like a bad soap opera. Fred was restless. He wasn't sleeping much and kept replaying the scene in his mind. "How did we not see it before?" he muttered one night. "I mean, I knew they were selfish, but this?" "They were counting on everyone thinking they were just a little rude," I said quietly. "Not cruel, not greedy. But Diana suspected something. That's why she did all this." Fred nodded slowly. But then, a couple of days later, he turned to me with something new on his mind. "There's something else that's been bugging me," he said cautiously. "I want to get DNA tests done on Jimmy's kids." I blinked, stunned. "What?" "I don't know. Maybe it's crazy. But after the way Brittany screamed about her children and how everything should be theirs, it just felt off. And honestly, those kids never looked much like Jimmy." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. It felt invasive, personal. But then again, Brittany had just forged a will and assaulted me. Maybe Fred's instincts weren't so off. "If you feel strongly about it," I said, "I'll support you." He thanked me, and the very next day he brought it up to Jimmy, who unsurprisingly erupted with fury. "You're just jealous because you can't have kids," Jimmy spat. "Don't you dare question mine!" Fred didn't argue. He just handed Jimmy an envelope with the testing information and left. A week later, we got the results. 2 of the 3 children were not biologically related to Jimmy. Fred was speechless. He stared at the paper in disbelief, reading it over and over. This changes everything." "I guess your gut was right," I whispered. But it didn't stop there. Motivated by the results, Jimmy decided to dig deeper. He started asking questions, probably more out of desperation than curiosity. And what he found hit like a lightning bolt. Brittany had been in multiple relationships before marrying Jimmy. Some overlapped. Some continued even after they tied the knot. Several of these men were married themselves, and it seemed Brittany had kept everything under wraps with intense secrecy. But her web of lies was starting to fall apart. One of the wives of Brittany's former lovers discovered the affair and demanded compensation. When she found out about the others, she spread the word. One by one, Brittany's lovers were exposed. The compensation claims stacked up, each one more serious than the last, and all of them were sent to Brittany's name at the in-laws' address. The final total? Astronomical. Way beyond what she or Jimmy could ever hope to pay. And that was why Brittany had been so desperate to get Diana's entire estate. Not for the children, not for her family's future, but to pay off the damages from the mess she created. Fred and I sat in stunned silence as the full truth unfolded. "They were living with Diana. For money," Fred muttered. "She paid their bills, covered their expenses. They pretended to love her, but all they wanted was what she had." "It makes me sick," I said. "She deserved better." Soon after, Jimmy and Brittany got into a massive fight. Neighbors said they were shouting for hours, throwing things, smashing dishes, screaming so loudly you could hear them from the street. When Brittany finally tried to leave, Jimmy lost control and physically attacked her. That was the last straw. The police came, again, and this time, both of them were arrested. Jimmy for domestic violence, and Brittany for multiple counts of fraud, harassment, and illegal financial activity. Mr. Smith later confirmed that additional charges had been filed regarding the forged will and attempted inheritance fraud. They were going to jail. And suddenly, Fred and I were left with another question. What would happen to their kids? Diana was gone. Jimmy and Brittany were behind bars. And that left only us, the so-called childless losers, as Brittany once called us, as the nearest family. Fred and I talked about it for days. Should we take them in? Was it the right thing to do? We didn't want to punish innocent children for their parents' crimes, but when we visited them, our hearts sank. The eldest, Ricky, looked me in the eye and sneered. "So, you came to pick up your charity cases, huh?" His siblings followed suit, arms crossed, eyes filled with contempt. "We'd be doing you a favor by letting you raise us," the middle child said. "You're just bitter losers with no kids." I was speechless. Even Fred, usually patient to a fault, looked defeated. "They're just repeating what their parents taught them," he said quietly. We tried again a week later. Same outcome. Disrespect, cruelty, entitlement. "I don't think we can do this," I finally said. Fred nodded. "It's not just about love. It's about safety, about values. And they've absorbed everything wrong from Brittany and Jimmy." In the end, we contacted Brittany's parents. They weren't thrilled, but they agreed to take the kids. Ricky, ever defiant, told us, "We'd rather live in a shack than with you freaks anyway." And honestly, that was fine by us. We never told the children about the DNA results. That was a decision we left to Jimmy, Brittany, and their extended family. We felt it wasn't our place. Some truths are too heavy to drop on a child, but we did tell Mr. Smith that we wanted no further involvement with them. It was heartbreaking, but it was also necessary. Diana had entrusted us with her legacy, not with the impossible task of healing children already steeped in hate. Fred and I talked about what to do next. The house held too many memories, too many shadows, too much pain. So we moved. We found a quiet town nestled in the hills, surrounded by trees and fresh air. We bought a modest cottage with a wraparound porch and a big backyard where someday, maybe, we could imagine children playing. There was even a little waffle shop down the road. Every time we passed it, I thought of Diana. I could almost hear her voice teasing, "Catherine, they've got Belgian waffles bigger than your head. Let's go." I always smiled, a little bittersweet, and whispered, "Next time." One morning, a few weeks after we'd settled in, I took a pregnancy test. I wasn't expecting much. I'd taken dozens before. But this one was different. Positive. I stared at the stick for a solid 5 minutes, unsure if I was dreaming. Then I screamed. Fred came running, panic written all over his face, until I shoved the test into his hands. We both cried. Ugly, loud, joyful tears. We made an appointment. The doctor confirmed it. I was pregnant.
Naturally, unexpectedly, beautifully.
I remember looking up at the ceiling in the doctor's office and thinking, "Diana, I wish you could see this." Maybe she already did. That day, Fred and I walked hand in hand to the waffle shop and ordered one giant plate, covered in strawberries and cream. We toasted with our forks. "To Diana," I said. "To the future," Fred added. We had made it through the storm, and now we were standing in the sun. Pregnancy changed everything. It's funny how something so small, something you can't even see, can transform your whole world. Fred started doing this thing where he'd talk to my belly like it was a two-way radio. "Hey there, little one. It's Dad. Can't wait to meet you. Just so you know, your mom's the strongest woman I've ever known." I'd laugh and pretend to be annoyed, but truthfully, it melted me every time. Life slowed down is the best way. The air was cleaner out here in the countryside. Mornings were quiet except for the soft chirping of birds and the occasional hum of our neighbor's mower. Fred and I took daily walks, holding hands, marveling at how life had taken such a strange, painful, beautiful turn. Every once in a while, I'd get flashes of the chaos we'd left behind, the will, the confrontation, the screaming, the punch, Jimmy and Brittany in handcuffs. Those memories would creep in like shadows, but they didn't scare me anymore. They reminded me of everything I had overcome. Everything we had overcome. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit on the porch with a blanket draped around my shoulders and stare up at the stars. That's when I talked to her, Diana. "I hope you're watching," I'd whisper, "because the life you wanted for us, it's finally here." Fred and I decided to name our baby girl Diana Rose. It felt right, like completing a circle. I started journaling again. Something about putting pen to paper made me feel grounded. I wrote about the day I met Fred, about the first time I hugged Diana, about the waffle place and the way we used to laugh until our stomachs hurt. I even wrote about Brittany. I wrote about pain, too, and how it forces you to grow. How people show their true colors when money is involved. How love sometimes comes from the most unexpected places, and how loss doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning. Fred worked on building a new workshop in the garage. He said he wanted to try his hand at furniture making. I cheered him on. Even when the first few chairs he built wobbled like jelly, we laughed more than we had in years. The baby bump grew. So did our joy. When we went in for our 20-week ultrasound and saw her little heartbeat on the screen, Fred actually cried. He held my hand like it was the first time all over again. "Can you believe this?" he whispered. And I shook my head, eyes full of tears. "No, but I'm so grateful." One day we got a letter in the mail. It was from Mr. Smith. He had closed out all of Diana's estate affairs and was sending us the final summary. He included a small note. "Catherine and Fred, thank you for honoring Diana's wishes with such grace and strength. She chose well. May your new chapter be filled with light. Warm regards, Mr. Smith." I placed the letter in a memory box along with Diana's original note, the one that started it all. Sometimes I pull them out and read them again. Her handwriting, so bold and deliberate, still carries a kind of strength I can't explain. It's as if she's still guiding us. And in some ways she is. As I entered my third trimester, Fred and I spent more time imagining the kind of parents we wanted to be. We made promises, no yelling, more listening, always dinner together as a family. I know life doesn't always go according to plan, but those promises felt like a good place to start. We even painted the nursery together, soft greens and creams, with tiny butterflies and leaves stenciled on the wall. Fred made a mobile out of driftwood and little stars he carved himself. It wasn't perfect, but it was us. Then one night, about a month before my due date, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange sensation. At first, I thought I'd just eaten too much ice cream, but then another wave hit me, and another. "Fred," I whispered, shaking his shoulder, "I think it's time." He jumped up like he had just been electrocuted. "What? Now? Are you sure? Is it? Oh my God, it's happening, isn't it?" I laughed through this discomfort. "Yes, and we practiced this, remember?" The drive to the hospital was a blur of contractions, and Fred speeding while trying to stay calm. I think he broke 3 traffic rules that night. But we made it, and after hours of labor, sweat, and tears, she arrived. Diana rose. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything inside me cracked open. Love poured in like sunlight after a storm. I held her close and cried, overwhelmed with the kind of emotion that has no words. Fred leaned over us, gently kissing her tiny forehead. "She's perfect," he whispered. And she was. Life after her birth was beautifully chaotic. Sleepless nights, spit-up stained shirts, diaper explosions in the middle of the night. And yet, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Every time I rocked her to sleep, I'd hum the same tune Diana used to sing when we walked to the market together. Something soft, old-fashioned, gentle. I never even asked what song it was. I just remembered the melody. One afternoon, while sorting through the last of our boxes, I found something unexpected. It was a small wrapped parcel I didn't remember packing. Inside was a book, Letters to My Grandchild. It was filled with blank pages, except the first one, in Diana's handwriting. "To my future grandchild, if I don't get the chance to meet you, just know this. You were always loved. I prayed for you, I believed in you, and if you're anything like your mom and dad, you're going to change the world. With all my love, Grandma Diana." I sat there, the baby asleep on my chest, tears streaming down my face. She knew. Somehow she knew. Even in death, Diana found a way to be part of our new beginning. We framed that page and hung it in Diana Rose's nursery. Every time I walk past it, I smile. This story, our story, didn't turn out the way I once imagined. It was messy and painful and unpredictable, but in the end it became something beautiful. Because love has a way of finding its way home, even if it takes the long road.